they built the houses of the officials who would live in those cities. The houses were made mostly of sun-baked bricks. These bricks were made of mud mixed with grass or straw. The straw acted as a binding agent to add strength to the bricks. When they first began their work, the straw was cut by other slaves and supplied to those who made the bricks. After the people complained about their hard work, the king ordered that they go out and cut the straw for themselves. This only added to their workload. The prophet Nahum describes parts of the brick-making process, which included trampling the mud and straw with the feet until it was well mixed. The mud was then packed into wooden molds, and after the bricks were removed from the molds, they were left to dry and harden in the sun. In some places, bricks were hardened in a special oven. The size of mud bricks could vary widely from one place to another. In 2 Samuel chapter 12, the meaning of the word malben is uncertain. It may refer to a brick mold or to the oven where bricks were baked.
Ramses II ruled Egypt for a very long time, roughly between 1280 and 1230 BC. The book of Exodus records his death. It was to a later pharaoh that Moses and Aaron came and asked permission for the Hebrews to go out into the desert to sacrifice to their God. On the face of it, this was a reasonable request. However, since it was coming from an oppressed group of forced laborers, the king was understandably suspicious.
Egyptian sources mention that people called Hapiru worked on the construction of the cities. The term Hapiru was a sociological term for people in Canaan, Syria, and northern Mesopotamia who owned no inherited land and often served as hired soldiers. In the book of Exodus, the use of the word Hebrews to refer to the Israelites may reflect the term Hapiru, although the exact relationship between the words is still unclear. The spectacular escape of the Hebrews from Egypt is recorded only in the Bible. This is not surprising. The Egyptians believed their king to be the representative on earth of the great sun god. In fact, the Pharaoh himself was considered to be a god. As such, he was always shown in art and literature as defeating all his enemies. Consequently, Egyptian sources never tell of disasters or defeats of the king, and it is not to be expected that they would preserve a story like the Exodus.
Footstools of the Egyptian kings had images of defeated enemies of Egypt carved in them. As he sat on his throne, the king always had his enemies symbolically under his feet. As is often the case, the biblical imagery of "my enemies a footstool under my feet" originates from real objects and practices in the ancient world.
The Israelite slaves living near the cities of Ramses and Pitom were joined together by Moses, and together they crossed over the Sea of Reeds, according to the narrative of the book of Exodus. This crossing may well have taken place at an area which is today known as the Bitter Lakes, as you can see out in front of me here. As it would happen, we are here after a night's rain, and this area has turned into mud, makes passing difficult enough on foot, much less with chariots. Exodus 14 describes the miraculous departure from Egypt. A strong wind divided the sea and even dried up the sea bottom. The text says that the people walked out on dry ground, but it also adds that the chariots of the Egyptians had difficulty moving, so perhaps the chariot wheels got stuck.
Several possible routes could take the Hebrews back to the land of Canaan, from where their forefathers had come. The most direct route was the way of the sea. After their conquests of countries to the north, the Egyptians had built a series of fortified positions along this route. This would have made it too dangerous for a group trying to escape from Pharaoh. A second route, heading directly eastward across the Sinai Plateau, would have been extremely difficult, with insufficient water sources. Faced with these choices, the fleeing nation of slaves headed southward.
The composition and the size of the Exodus group is debated. The group may have numbered only a few thousand people. It's described as a mixed group of Israelites and people of other ethnic origins. The leaders, Moses and Aaron, were from the tribe of Levi. Whatever the actual size of the group, the experience of the Exodus had a deep influence on Israel's faith and religion. The Israelites had experienced that their God was able to defeat the awful powers of the Egyptian gods and their representative, the Pharaoh. From that point onward in Israelite history, whenever the nation was in danger of being destroyed by foreign powers, it was faith in the Lord, who had truly shown His might in Egypt, that kept the people going in difficult times. It's difficult to reconstruct the route the Exodus group took from Egypt through the wilderness to the land of Canaan. We don't have a complete chronological description of the route, and often we're not able to identify with certainty the place names that are mentioned in the biblical sources.
These sources indicate that the Israelites stayed for extended periods in 3 specific areas: around Mount Sinai, possibly located in the southern part of the Sinai Peninsula, at the oasis of Kadesh Barnea at the edge of the Negev, and around Mount Hor, which has traditionally been located in the area of the Seir mountain range to the southeast of the Dead Sea. Many scholars, however, believe that Mount Hor was much closer to Kadesh Barnea.
The Israelites followed the coast. The southern Sinai Peninsula is mountainous, and the coastal strip provides the best natural thoroughfare. After moving some distance southward, the group went inland, following the natural route provided by wide, dry riverbeds, or wadis. It is extremely difficult for a large group to travel in a very dry area. The trip must be planned carefully from one source of water to the next.
After a journey of several weeks into the wilderness, Moses brought the people to a mountain. There they were later to receive the commandments of God. The mountain is known as the mountain of the Lord, and in other books of the Old Testament it is also called Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb. All of them are the same place. In fact, we do not know today exactly where that place is. This mountain here is one of the candidates, known today as Mount Sinai, also known in Arabic as Mount Moses. This mountain stands at an altitude of over 2,200 meters, and it's quite a climb to get up here. In fact, today, in the wintertime, we have snow on the ground. It's quite cold.
The livestock of the Exodus group consisted mainly of sheep and goats. Neither of these animals depends entirely on grass. They are also able to browse from bushes and trees. They are especially good at finding their food even in arid and semi-arid regions. The flocks themselves provided their owners with milk and occasional meat. It is clear, however, that additional food was also needed from time to time, and this need is reflected in the biblical narrative.
The Israelites remained a long time at Mount Sinai. There they made a covenant with the God who had rescued them from the king of Egypt. There too they constructed a sanctuary, but one that could easily be taken down and moved from place to place in their wanderings.
From Sinai, they moved on in a northern direction, through wadis and open sandy terrains, until they arrived at the large oasis of Kadesh Barnea. The oasis is situated between the Negev and Sinai deserts. Here the Israelites encamped for many years. An oasis is a source of water and sometimes plant food in an area that is otherwise desert. Kadesh Barnea probably looked similar to these oases, with water and date palm trees.
From Kadesh they made several attempts to occupy land in the south of Canaan. Some small groups may have managed to move into southern parts of Canaan, The large group, under Moses, intended to move eastwards, passing through the region south of the Dead Sea. This area was populated by the people of Edom. When the Israelites asked for permission to pass, however, the Edomites refused. The Israelites promised not to trespass fields and not to take water from the wells, but the Edomites, who must have been too strong for the nomadic Israelite tribes, would not give their permission.
Another attempt to head north from Kadesh was met with opposition from the king of the Negev region of Arad. Not long after, the Israelites were victorious and destroyed Arad, calling the place Hormah, meaning destruction. Arad had been occupied as early as the 4th millennium BC. At the time of the Israelite invasion, there was no city of Arad. There had been a Canaanite village there as early as the 4th millennium. By the early 3rd millennium, it grew to a fortified city, surrounded by a long wall with intermittent guard towers. Runoff rainwater was collected in a depression in the center of the city. Much later, in the Judean period, a well was dug there. Excavations have revealed private houses as well as temples and a palace. Partly because of increasingly dry conditions, the Canaanite city was abandoned around 2650 BC, and the site remained unoccupied for about 1500 years.
Arad is not mentioned in the Bible after the Israelite invasion, but archaeological excavations show that Israelite settlement was begun there in the 11th century. In the time of Solomon, about 100 years later, the city was fortified and guarded the north-south route along the Arava Valley.
The climate in the Arava and Jordan Valley must have been very similar to what exists today. The main differences are in the type and amount of vegetation and the presence of wildlife. The Jordan Valley and the area south of the Dead Sea had both forest and grassland. There were large numbers of gazelles and similar mammals, which provided plenty of meat for hunters. The forests also offered considerable wild food resources in the form of fruits and nuts. The Edomites must have been successful in agriculture, in raising animals, and in hunting. Both forests and game have largely disappeared over the centuries.
The Exodus group turned and headed south as far as the Red Sea, near the present-day city of Eilat. From there, they moved in a northeasterly direction, entering Edomite territory from the south. This time, relations with Edom were better. The Israelites took the desert road, as the biblical sources call it. After a long and difficult trip, the Israelites reached the mountainous area of southern Edom called Seir.
In Judges chapter 5 and verse 4, we read that the Lord came from Seir to fight for his people. Seir was a mountain range on the southeast of the Dead Sea. This mountain range is mentioned in the Bible as a dwelling place of the Lord. Before they entered the land, the Israelites camped for a relatively long period in the valleys near Seir. The highest peak of the range is Mount Hor, the mountain where Aaron was buried.
Until today, this entire mountainous area is barren, and in summer it is also extremely dry. It was probably here that Moses struck the rock and brought forth water. The place is still called Wadi Musa, recalling the name of Moses.
From here, we can see the valleys where the Israelites camped for an extended period of time. It was here that the Israelites were attacked by poisonous snakes. God told Moses to make a snake out of bronze and raise it up in a prominent position in the camp. The Israelites who were bitten by a snake had only to look up at the bronze snake and they would be healed. God told Moses to take Aaron and Aaron's son Eleazar up to the top of Mount Hor. The three of them climbed the mountain. There, Moses took off Aaron's special clothes of the high priest, and Aaron died. Moses then clothed Eleazar with the high priest's clothing, and Eleazar replaced his father as the high priest of Israel.
From the mountain range of Seir, the Exodus group moved northwards over the King's Highway, which passes along the ridge of the mountains, until they arrived at a wide wadi. This wadi formed the boundary between the land of the Edomites and the land of Moab. The biblical name of the wadi is Zered. Today it is called Wadi Hassa.
The Israelites wanted to pass through the land of Moab. They contacted the Amorite king who controlled the land and people of Moab in those days, and they asked permission to pass through his land on the king's highway, which ran through his territory. They promised that they would stay on the king's highway, that they would not enter his fields, that they would not drink the water from his wells. But when the Amorite king refused his permission, they had in fact to stay down inside this deep wadi. This forced them to go in a westerly direction instead of north as they had wanted to.
It is also possible that they turned back eastwards through the wadi in order to return to the desert east of the land of Moab using the desert road.
The Israelites now moved northward. When the Amorite king refused to give them permission to pass, they fought and defeated several Amorite armies, conquering the Transjordan plateaus of Ammon and Gilead. Finally, the Israelites camped in the Jordan Valley, not far from Mount Nebo. The Bible refers to the area as the Plains of Moab. Here, just to the east of the Jordan River, the people of Israel will experience a changing of the guard. Moses ascends Mount Nebo to die, and a new leader, Joshua, will lead some of the tribes of Israel into the land where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had once lived.